Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the PM Learning Series. My name is Shivi. I'm the host for the show. Today, we have a slightly different schedule. Usually, we go live on Friday, but today we're going live on Wednesday. So hopefully to see as many of you as our normal showing schedule. Please drop in the chat where you're joining us from, and really excited to say hi to many of you again. The PM Learning Series is a series of live streaming events where industry thought leaders and product builders share their career journey and lessons learned along the way to inspire aspiring as well as current product builders like you to level up your product career. So make sure you subscribe to the newsletter, which we include in the event description for recap of key takeaways from this event, as well as updates to future events. Today with me, I have a very special guest, Jackie, who I personally consider as my role model. Maybe I didn't tell you this, Jackie, but Jackie was most recently the head of product at Asana for about 8 years. During her tenure, she grew the PM team from being the first PM to over 20 amazing people, and growing the revenue from 0 to more than 100 million in annual recurring revenue, and launches the Asana's APM program. We'll touch upon quite a bit of that during today's chat as well. Over the 15 years of PM experience, Jackie have worked at both Google and Microsoft, both really reputable tech company, and in a diverse set of roles, from consumer PM to B2B to platform to mobile to growth, as well as as an individual contributor to manager and manager of managers. So really amazing, different, diverse set of experience. I think what I know Jackie the most, and probably most of you, is because of the books that Jackie have written with Gail. So the first one, Cracking the PM Interview, has been credited to help leveling the playing field for product management talent. I think I personally read it probably 2 to 3 times at different point in my career as I was preparing for PM Interview. And her most recent book, Cracking the PM Career, is actually a Bible that I constantly read. It definitely feels a lot of the posts that I'm writing. You can see I have stickies here, just like I'm studying for an exam, something that I usually pull out from my desk for easy reference. So highly, highly recommend the book if you haven't already check it out. So thank you so much, Jackie. I just brag a lot about you, and we're really, really honored to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. I also just got a chance to look at the chat. I think it's blowing up. We have folks from Brazil, someone from somewhere I can't even pronounce the name of the city or the country. We have Dallas, with someone from Massachusetts, Delaware, Denver, NYC, India, Arizona, Vancouver, Seattle, Germany. And yeah, hello to a lot of product enthusiasts. So can't wait to learn from you, Jackie. And so for folks who are tuning in live today, please feel free to drop in the chat what questions you might have for Jackie, and we'll feature them and pick them out throughout the chat. So please shower Jackie and me with questions. Now, let's get started, Jackie. Why don't you walk us through a little bit of your career journey? Maybe we travel down the memory lane and you can tell us how you get into the world of product.
I was one of the lucky people who was able to get into product right out of college. So when I was in college, I didn't know what product management was. And I basically had a friend say, Jackie, you have to apply to the PM role. So I showed up to the interviews not knowing what the role was at all. And that's how I got my first internship at Microsoft. And I stayed at Microsoft full time, because it turned out if you wanted to join from intern to full time, you didn't have to interview again. And I was so afraid of interviewing that I was like, well, I better just accept the job now that I have it. And from there, when I moved to New York, I decided to apply to the Google APM program. And I was doing great at Microsoft, so I was sure I would get hired, but I didn't. I got 2 interviews and then was rejected. So a year later, I reapplied, and that's how I got into Google.
That's actually a good story, because you said that you were so afraid of interviewing, but you wrote one of the best PM interview book. And thanks for sharing also your failure story as well. I didn't pass the first round interview. I do wanted to talk more about your experience both at Google and Asana. But first question is, I know that you moved from Google to Asana, being the first PM. I think a lot of folks here who are maybe working at big tech as PM and trying to make a bigger dent, in the universe by moving to a smaller startup, right now might not be the best, market environment. But just say, what's your advice for people who are already a PM but looking to make a bigger impact, maybe at a smaller company, earlier stage? What advice would you give people for that transition? How do you look for the best sort of first PM role in a smaller company?
Yeah, so I was very lucky to get hired into Asana via referral. So one of the engineers I'd worked with at Microsoft, so not even Google, but one hop back, when they were looking for their first PM, referred me over. And that actually ended up being very true for how Asana hired most of our early people. Is they tended to be referrals, either from people who currently worked at Asana or from our investors. So definitely, if you're looking to join a startup, getting to talk to different people who are in venture capital or other kinds of investors is a great way to get connected to small companies that might be hiring in the future. And I would say that as someone who's currently at a big company, you have a huge amount of value you can add to a startup, because during your time at a big company, you're getting to absorb all of the best practices that this big company does. You get to see, how do they do spec reviews or design reviews? How do they launch things? What's on their launch checklist? Do they let people push code on Fridays or not? All of the little details that a big company has had years and years to figure out. When you show up, you're able to come with all of that information and knowledge and decide which of those to apply and which don't make sense to apply to your new company.
Awesome. Yes, I love the being able to share best practice, being able to hit the ground running. What would you say are some other major differences when you transition from, let's say, a more established company like the Google and Microsoft to Asana, which is fast growing, hyper growth? What are some differences in PMing, but also like what surprised you? What skills you need to quickly pick up and unlearn from a more established environment to a hyper growth environment?
Yeah. So I remember when I joined Asana, I thought that it would feel totally different. And I was kind of worried about what it would be like to work with this new team. And what I found is that working with my team felt very, very similar to how it did at Microsoft or at Google. And the big difference is that when I was working with my team to decide, what's our new feature, how are we going to design it, I would do that with, the co-founder in the room. And so once we all decided, okay, here's what we want to build, I was like, okay, great, we're going to launch it. Let's, in my mind, I'm like, okay, now we got to get it through launch review and all these steps. But we didn't, because everyone who was part of that decision was already in the room as we made it. And that was one of the big ways that things speed up when you work at a startup, is that the people are in the room with you. So you don't have layers and layers of approval above you. But I would say that the thing that was really different for me is that at Google, when I needed to learn how to do something, I always went to somebody else in Google. So I would go talk to somebody who was an expert at user research there. And at Asana, we were a small company. We didn't have those experts. So I remember when our training videos weren't very good. So I said, I'm going to just redo those videos. And I was like, I have no idea how. And so I mentioned this to our head of business, and he's like, oh, I know someone in my last company who did that. I'll connect you. And so I had a phone call with someone who worked at a different company who told me all of her tricks for how to do good onboarding videos. And this is a pattern that I saw again and again at a startup, is that my mentors were not necessarily people within the company, but people at other startups. And it was really nice because I got that feeling of community that I thought maybe you'd be missing. Instead of finding it just within the company, I found it with other people.
I like that, how resourceful you are by looking both within and outside of the company. You mentioned about one of the key differences is that every decision can be made in the room because, the co-founder, founder will be in the room with you. Have you ever have to deal with opinionated founders and co-founders whose opinions clash with you? I feel like that was the number one question I always get when I talk to startup PMs.
Yes, all the time. And so I'd say the most important thing first is to pick your startup well, and pick a startup where you believe in the mission and you believe in the founders. Because if you're joining the company and you fundamentally respect them, then you can overcome any of these differences of opinions or places where you have those strong disagreements. The place where a lot of people kind of go badly is they show up and they're like, I can't wait to work at this company. And then they're like, the founders are all wrong about this. I'm going to just like throw away their stuff and put my own vision and strategy in place. And that never goes well. So when I'm working with opinionated founders, the most important thing for me is to really invest in understanding like where that opinion comes from. And what I found is that often the founder there's an assumption they're making that they take for granted that everyone must know just like they do, but it hasn't been communicated. So for example, at Asana, we would focus on shipping products that worked for people on teams at companies, at big companies. But the founders really cared about in the future making this a product that everyone could use. And so sometimes their opinion came from that long-term vision. Or sometimes they had a really strong opinion that came from some feedback they'd heard from one of their investors about like what growth rate we ought to be targeting, or what our next like investment milestone would be. So a lot of times they have extra information that I didn't have, and I needed to ask a lot of questions to get those. And once you know that, then it becomes a lot easier to move forward.
Yes, understanding the why behind, and maybe they have more information than you. Empathize, just like how we empathize with our user, right? Empathize with founders. I think definitely a good tip. We have a lot of folks, I think, in the audience. There are aspiring PMs or PMs who are looking to get a better PM job. Obviously, you're the author of one of the most known classic PM interview books, Cracking the PM Interview. So I think one thing that I'm curious to learn about is what has changed since you published that book a few years ago. And then what advice would you give to people, I think either have no prior PM experience, but maybe some adjacent experience, either in strategy or some other roles, or people who have no experience working in tech and aiming to maybe get into PM and get into tech. So if you can speak to the differences and some of the best advice you will give for people to navigate this transition.
Yeah. So in terms of what's changed in interviewing, I would say the biggest change is this concept that I like to call flexing the framework. So when I wrote this book, there was sort of no guidance on how to do an interview. And a lot of people would be super conversational in how they answered questions. And the interviewer couldn't follow along. And so they'd be like, oh, this person is bad at communication. And so people learned that that a good way to interview is to have a more structured answer so that the interviewer can follow along. And a lot of times that comes into following some framework. So like the Pirate metrics framework with like R, activation, adoption, retention, referral, one more. And so what interviewers found is that some people would come in, they would just recite a framework as an answer, but they didn't deeply understand it. And so people started designing their questions to make sure that you couldn't answer an interview question well by just plugging in a predefined framework that you read in a book. So it's important to deeply understand what's behind the questions and expect that the questions don't expect to answer a question with a framework, expect to have to make some tweaks to it. So for example, with the Pirate metrics framework, maybe you're working at a government institution in this hypothetical example. And so actually revenue is not the most important thing, it's some other goal. And then for the second question about advice for someone who has no experience in the tech industry, but is aiming for a PM role in tech. I would say, first of all, product manager is really a role around, the thing I really look for to know if someone's a product manager or not is what I call product mindset. And that is the habit of always thinking about the problems and goals, like what problem are we trying to solve? What's our goal here? And then making all of my decisions about how to solve the problem while tying it back to those goals, like never losing sight of like the reason why I want to build something. And so I would say that if you have no experience at all in the tech industry, first of all, study products, study great products, use them, try to assess like, why are they working? What was the goal of this product? And what are the choices they made that support this goal? So for example, a lot of times you'll see companies try to get you to invite all your contact list. And you're like, I don't want to do that. It's like, okay, but what's the company trying to do? Why would they have done that? You know, are there any things they did to make this feel better to the user or to encourage them to share more frequently? So always having that lens on, I think, can help build your mindset up. And then in terms of transitioning in, one of the best ways to transition in is with an internal transfer. So if you have if you're at a company where you can start doing the product manager job, even though that's not your title, you can start getting the experience and you already have credibility and trust within the company. And then you can do that internal transfer. The other thing I've seen work nicely is people at a big tech company, maybe you're in sales at a big tech company. If you can work with a product team and start to absorb their best practices, often then you can move to a smaller company because they really value that you've seen how a big company does it from the inside.
Absolutely. I can resonate with some of that, like flexing the framework, not just sticking to it and reciting it, right? Memorizing the PM mindset of always starting with why, what problem you're trying to solve. I also feel like both internal transfer as well as going from a big tech non-PM role to a smaller tech PM role is a good way. We do have a couple questions for knowing the current environment, right? Like there's a lot of layoffs. We're potentially going into a recession. Does any of your advice change of like how people should continue to level up and like maybe build their PM mindset while companies are not hiring and be prepared for it when the opportunities opens up?
Yeah, I am not an expert on this current state of how things are in product, but I do believe it will not last forever. So I do think that it's much harder to transfer, much harder to switch to new companies, and with the layoffs especially, can make things really risky to switch to a company that even if you get hired, you might not stay. So I do think that to the extent that you can continue growing within whatever role you have, and even if it's not PM, but you want to get there eventually, what I found is that often, even before this this time period, there was really a shortage of great senior product managers, right? People who had been a product manager for at least 3 years, maybe more like 5, and were starting to understand how to do strategy work, trying to understand how to decide what their team should work on and what impact that would have on the business. So I think that if you are able to invest in growing those skills and practicing them, I think that those will be incredibly valued once companies are hiring again.
I can resonate with that. I think at a certain point, we'll touch upon that later in our talk as well. PM product strategy is such a big skill set that you have many spectrum that you can practice and get better at honing that craft. I wanted to transition from cracking the interview to how do you crack the career. We do have one question from still frame it in an interview sense, but I think we can answer it more broadly as in how the career trajectory changes from going from PM to senior PM and to manager of PMs. What are some skill set that you think are the major differences in this, from climbing this career ladder? And then what do you like or dislike about being a manager of PMs?
Nice. I love this question, and it's really insightful because when I was a new PM, I hadn't quite realized how much things change from PM to senior PM to manager. And what I've learned is that there are really 3 distinct phases to the PM's career, like you said. And in this first stage where you're a PM, a great PM is someone who ships products that delight customers and hit the goals. So the kinds of questions that you see tend to be these product questions, analytical questions, execution questions, definitely some about how do you like work with your team, things like that. But as you continue to grow, you don't automatically move from PM to senior PM just by getting really, really good at shipping product, because the job changes and there's a new responsibility of product strategy. And so the great PMs at senior PM level are the ones who identify new opportunities and are able to come up with winning strategies for the product to succeed in the marketplace. And so here, when I'm leveling people for senior PM, I'm really thinking, I usually do this not through like a new interview question, but I say, okay, tell me about a project that you're proud of. And so those behavioral, tell me about your past questions are where I'm really trying to dig in and find out what kind of impact you had and whether the work you were doing was strategic. Were you just building what somebody told you to do? Or did you see something new that nobody else had? Did you have some new insight that no one else had? And then were you able to successfully execute on that insight, build something new that, that was then successful in the market? So that's this next stage. And then for the last one, when you become into management, the job again totally changes. And I used to think that like a great manager is someone whose reports love them. And it turns out that that is like not even a factor in whether you're a great manager or not. It matters because you need the morale of your team to be good. But a great manager, a great product leader is all about organizational excellence. And this is a great manager is someone who builds a great team, who is able to ship products and create winning strategies at a scale beyond what that person could do if they were just a PM still. So it's really about multiplying the impact that you can have. And so a lot of the work here is around hiring a great team, coaching and developing people so that they grow and they can do better at shipping products and creating strategies, putting in place processes that help lots of large teams work together fast and not slow. And in addition to all of that, you're also a strategic advisor to the rest of the company. So making sure that you show that excellent strategic judgment and that you can make decisions for the company as a whole rather than your like little domain. And the questions you get there tend to be all the questions that would probe into those kind of things, like, how do you do one-on-ones, or tell me about a time that you had that you helped coach a report, those kinds of things.
Thanks for laying out the two stages differences in like what you're looking for. Recently, we talked to another PM leader and he referenced the Tesla's analogy. How do you build a machine that builds a machine is how you think about being a manager. Like how do you build a factory, the automation, then that builds the car. So I think to your point, like how do you build up the team of PMs so that they can build really great product and enable them to do that? There's a lot of stuff in your Cracking the PM Career book, which really amazed me of how much you're able to synthesize your learnings and best practices and things like that. There are two questions that I wanted to ask there. One is, what are some top tips that you want to give people when it comes to thinking about growing their PM career? The second thing I wanted to ask personally, actually, for a selfish reason, is I feel like you're always doing the right thing, and staying ahead of a lot of other PMs, right? Like you're the first one who write that book about PM interviewing when no one else really in the market have produced that book. And then you were able to condense so much of your learning into cracking the PM career. What are some of the habits that you think you have that have helped you to be so successful in your PM career?
Nice. So yeah, top advice for advancing your career, I would say, is understanding the importance of your manager in your professional development. And then secondary to that, I will say your manager's peers are also really, really critical people to have in your growth. And so the phrase that I really recommend people use is, like, let's say that you're a PM and you want to become a senior PM. Say like, hey, I would love to become a senior PM someday. What do you suggest that I focus on now so that I'll be ready when the opportunity arises? And you can use exactly the same thing if you want to be a manager. Like, hey, I'd love to be a people manager someday. What should I focus on now so that I'll be ready when the opportunity arises? And the reason that this template is so magical is that it's actually doing like 3 different things at once. First of all, it's making it really clear what your goal is. Right, because especially with like people management, a lot of managers aren't going to proactively assume you want to be a people manager. Even if they should, it makes their job harder that they have people who want to be people managers. And so they might just like pretend they don't hear it if you don't say it to them. Second of all is it brings it up in a non-confrontational way. Because you're making it future facing, you're not saying like, make me a people manager now, or like, you've messed up, you didn't promote me yet. You're really bringing them over onto your team. You're saying like, hey, this is in the future. I really want you to kind of come along with me. And then the third thing it does is it really asks for feedback that is focused, that is targeted on that promotion. Because a lot of times people aren't careful about what kind of feedback they give. And like, I'll get feedback that I use too many filler words. But that too many filler words is not going to stop me from getting promoted. And fixing that is not going to get me promoted. That's just like random feedback. Like, sure, I'd be a better talker, but I want to get the feedback that's like critical for that next promotion level.
Absolutely. I love the, be clear on your goals so that you do the work for your manager, that they don't have to think about it, and then make them part of your growth team, right? Like they're supporting you, helping you. And then, yes, not all feedback are, helpful or important. Just like how we prioritize our feature, I think even feedback needs some level of prioritization. We're almost coming up on time. So I do want to switch to a very, very important topic for any PMs that you alluded to earlier as well, is how to crack the PM or product strategy. You recently launched a few Maven cohort courses. I wonder if you're still doing it. So feel free to give it a plug for anyone who's attending today's session. But I would love any sort of frameworks or actionable advice that you want to give to PMs or aspiring PM who want to be better at cracking the product strategy.
Yes. And I don't have my next date set, but I'll probably be doing it somewhere January, February, March of next year. So if you search for my name in Maven, you can join the wait list. But in terms of creating product strategy, what I found is everybody was using a different word for what strategy meant. And people were really bad at explaining, like, what does it mean to be more strategic? Like, I knew I had to be more strategic, but I had no idea how. And so basically I've broken it down to a 3-part framework, which is vision, framework, and roadmap. And so if you want to create a strategy, just start by blocking off half a day and draft up these 3 pieces. So your vision is your inspiring picture of the future. This is where you say, like, imagine if like 5 years from now, you could just pull your phone out of your pocket and it would automatically show you all the people around you who wanted to play the same sport as you and like hooked you up for a game that was going to like be starting in the next few minutes. And so you're really like getting people to like want to do this thing with you. The framework is where the strategic framework is where you narrow in on, here are the target customer that we're going after, and here's what we think it takes to win. So you say, we're really going for people in dense metropolitan areas who recently graduated college and are sort of missing the connection that they felt from living on campus with people. And we think to win them, what we really need is going to be a high density of events and a few factors that make it feel really cool, and a bit of safety things to get them in. And then you've got your roadmap, and your strategic roadmap is not the same as your product backlog. It's not like a commitment to what you're going to build. Instead, you're working backwards from the vision and seeing what are the key milestones we're going to hit. So that way you can say, like, if we work at the pace we think we're going to, will we actually get this built in any reasonable amount of time? So maybe the first time I put together my strategic framework, I'm like, and this product will launch in 5 years. And I'm like, oh no, I need to launch in 1 year. Like, okay, let's redo it and see what it takes to bring it in.
That's awesome. Do you bring in people and team with you as part of this process of shaping product strategy? What's your advice there?
Yes, definitely. So I think take a half a day to draft it on your own, bring your thoughts together, use all the things that you've seen in your customer meetings and in your own data analysis and all of that. But then first work with your close allies. So your designer, your tech lead, whoever the people on your team that you're closest with are. And then you can start to do a larger process where you bring people in. And there it's best to actually not be like, here's the strategy, like give me feedback, but instead say, here's all of the interesting information we've seen in our research. What do you think the strategy ought to be? And because you've shown them the same information that you had, they'll sort of co-create that strategy with you.
Right. I love that. I think so first summary, vision, framework, roadmap. And I think you have some fans who wanted to sign up for your next cohort of Cracking the PM strategy. I know we're coming up on time. There are some burning questions in the community around landing PM interviews. So maybe we'll blend that into our lightning round of question as one of the final advice you'll give to folks. But are you ready for the challenge for a quick round of questions?
Yes.
Awesome. So the first one is, maybe let's start with, what's your favorite, say, non-tech product that you like to use nowadays?
I recently discovered the cherry pitter from OXO, where you can pick 6 cherries at once, and its mechanism, even though it's just like all plastic, is just like incredible, the way that the cherries just drop into a bowl.
That's awesome. Maybe something interesting. I love cherry, so it might be worth checking it out. Who would you say is the most influential product leader or role model that have impacted the most of your product career?
Well, if I was going to go really early on, Joel Spolsky, who wrote Joel on Software, was the first only product manager blog that was ever out there, was hugely influential both on teaching me to be a good PM and inspiring me to write about what I'd learned. And then beyond that, I'd say today, I really love all of the stuff that I learned from JR, who was Asana's head of product. I got to sit next to him and really apprentice with him.
That's awesome. Now, final advice. I'd like to actually ask in the frame of a lot of people in the chat were asking, how do you land product interviews if you're an aspiring PM? So maybe you have any best practice of like people who are trying to break in, but might or might not have that right experience yet. How do they stand out? How do they actually get an interview so that they get to practice all the frameworks and best tips that you included in your book?
Yeah. So the best ways to get that interview are going to be referrals. So, go to your alumni network, find someone who works at the company that you wanted to. And even if they don't know you, like ask if they'll submit your resume for you, because that internal submission skips a bunch of the early filtering stages. So that's really important. And then the other thing is coffee chats. So for example, some people become the first PM at a product that they love. I know someone who did this for Venmo. And basically you can kind of like give feedback on the product in whatever their product forums are. And then eventually like reach out and be like, hey, I would love to like chat with someone. And once you can have a coffee chat with someone where you're not saying, please hire me, but you're saying, I'd love to learn more about your company. Now they're trying to pitch you on it. And it's a lot easier to connect with someone there to the point where they're willing to bring you in for an interview.
Yeah, I love the coffee chat advice. It feels like less committed and like heavy than an interview, right? Like where you actually get to know the company. You are doing your research in that way as well, because then you can tailor your feedback or how you tell your story based on what the companies are looking for. So I think coffee chat or informational interviews are actually really informational. That gives you a lot of insight into the company. Cool. We're coming up on time, and thank you so much, Jackie, for spending time with us and sharing some of your best advice and tips. I'm sure that the LinkedIn community is very appreciative of your time, and I personally learn a lot from you as well, as always. And so just a recap, folks, next Wednesday, we'll send out a quick recap of 5 key takeaways from Jackie in our conversation today. So make sure you subscribe to our newsletter in the event description. And thank you again, Jackie, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye. See you at another PM Learning series soon. Thank you.